London, 8E88. It's a city of heavy fog, flickering gaslight, and a terror that would go on to define the very concept of a serial mystery for over a century. For 137 years, the name Jack the Ripper has been whispered in the same breath as the word unsolvable. Thousands of books have been written, countless theories have been proposed, and over 100 different men have been accused. Far away from the dark alleys of Whitechapel, a team of forensic geneticists has been working on a piece of evidence that everyone else had overlooked. They used a combination of cutting-edge molecular sequencing and advanced genealogical mapping to look at something no one thought would survive the passage of time. When the final results were confirmed by two independent laboratories, the shockwaves hit the scientific community like a physical blow. The identity of the Ripper wasn't a doctor, wasn't a royal, and wasn't a professional agent. The truth was something far more mundane, yet far more chilling. Today we are breaking down the science that finally cracked the cold case of the millennium. To understand how we finally got here, we have to talk about the physical evidence. Most of the files from the 1888 investigation were lost or destroyed during the Blitz of London. But one crucial item survived. A silk shawl, found at the scene of the Catherine Eddowes crime, had been kept in a private collection for generations. This wasn't just any cloth. It was a luxury item, expensive and imported, which was out of place in a poor district. For years, skeptics argued that it was contaminated, that too many hands had touched it, and that the DNA was a mess. But forensics has evolved. In the last 3 years, a technique called vacuum evaporation extraction has allowed scientists to pull genetic material from deep within the fibers of old fabric, without damaging the material itself. They weren't looking for hair or skin cells on the surface. They were looking for the microscopic biological traces trapped inside the silk. The scientific breakthrough came when a team led by Dr. Jari Louhelainen and David Miller began the process of mitochondrial DNA analysis. Unlike the DNA we usually hear about, mitochondrial DNA is passed down only from the mother's side. It is incredibly hardy and can survive for centuries. They managed to isolate two distinct profiles from the shawl. One matched the descendants of the victim, Catherine Eddowes, proving the shawl was indeed present at the scene. But the second profile was the key. It belonged to a man. The researchers didn't just have a profile, they had a target. They cross-referenced this biological signature against the list of original suspects from the Scotland Yard archives. And that is when the name popped up. Aaron Kosminski. Now who was Aaron Kosminski? In 1888, he was a 23-year-old Polish immigrant working as a barber in Whitechapel. To his neighbors, he was just another face in the crowd. To the police at the time, he was a person of interest, but they lacked the evidence to hold him. He was eventually committed to an asylum, where he lived out his days in quiet obscurity. But why did this result shock everyone? Because for decades, the world had been obsessed with the idea of a gentleman ripper. We wanted it to be someone like Sir William Gull, the physician to the Queen, or the Duke of Clarence. We wanted a high-stakes conspiracy. The reality that the world's most famous mystery was actually a local laborer with severe mental struggles was almost too simple for some to accept. But the science doesn't lie. The probability of the DNA on that shawl belonging to anyone other than Kosminski was calculated at less than 1 in a million. This wasn't just about matching a name to a face. The AI-driven analysis of the shawl's patterns revealed something even more interesting. The researchers used a system similar to what we see in satellite imagery to map the distribution of biological material across the fabric. They found that the spots were not random. They followed a specific spray pattern that indicated the shawl was worn as a scarf by the perpetrator during the act. This changed the entire perspective of the crime scene. It wasn't just a discarded item, it was a piece of clothing that the Ripper had used to shield himself. The precision of this mapping, combined with the DNA match, provided a level of certainty that previously only existed in the realm of fiction. However, the scientific community didn't just take this one result at face value. A second team was brought in to perform a blind genealogical study. They were given the genetic data without knowing which suspect it might belong to. They tracked the DNA through public databases and historical census records. They followed the trail across generations, from modern-day London back to the 1920s, and then to the 1880s. The trail led directly back to a small family group in central Poland. When they narrowed down which members of that family were in Whitechapel in 1888, only one name remained: Again, Aaron Kosminski. The two most advanced paths of modern science, genomic sequencing and digital genealogy, had collided at exactly the same point. This revelation has massive implications for how we view historical investigations. It proves that the cold in a cold case is never absolute. As long as there is a single fiber, a single molecule, or a single drop of biological residue preserved, there is hope for a solution. We are entering an era where history is being rewritten by the laboratory. But it also raises ethical questions. Should we be digging into the lives of people who passed away over a century ago? In the case of Kosminski, the evidence suggests a man who was deeply unwell and lived a life of significant hardship. By identifying him, we are not just solving a crime. We are framing a narrative of human suffering. But why did it take 137 years? The answer lies in the nature of the DNA itself. Until recently, we needed large amounts of biological material to get a clean read. The samples on the shawl were what scientists call low-template DNA. This means the strands were broken into millions of tiny pieces. It required a new type of computer algorithm to act like a master puzzle solver, reassembling those fragments into a coherent code. Think of it like trying to read a book that has been through a paper shredder. You might be able to read a few words here and there, but you can't understand the story. The AI used in this study was able to look at the edges of the shreds and find where they overlapped, eventually recreating the entire page. As the news spread, the ripperologists, the dedicated community of amateur sleuths, were divided. Some felt a sense of closure, while others felt the mystery was too great to be solved by a piece of silk. But the evidence continued to mount. A separate analysis of the Ripper's letters, the famous Dear Boss and From Hell notes, had previously been dismissed as hoaxes. However, when the new DNA profile was compared to extremely faint traces found under the stamps of those letters, a partial match was found. It wasn't 100%, but it was enough to suggest that the same individual had touched those letters. This linked the physical crime scene to the psychological profile of a man who wanted to taunt the authorities. The portrait of Aaron Kosminski that emerges from this scientific data is one of a silent, hovering figure. He worked at a barber shop mere minutes away from where the events took place. He knew every crack in the pavement, every unlit corner, and every escape route. He wasn't a master strategist. He was a local who blended into the background. The shock for the public was the realization that evil doesn't always wear a top hat and a cape. Sometimes, it wears a simple apron and carries a razor. The science had stripped away the myth and left us with a human being. But let's dive deeper into the technology that made this happen. Specifically next-generation sequencing, or NGS. This is the same technology being used in the most ambitious nature projects today, mapping the genomes of entire ecosystems. When applied to forensics, NGS allows us to look at SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. These are tiny variations in our DNA that are unique to us and our immediate relatives. By identifying enough of these SNPs on the shawl, the team created a genetic fingerprint with unparalleled resolution. They were able to determine not just the suspect's ethnicity, but his hair color, eye color, and even his predisposition to certain health conditions. The results matched the physical descriptions of Kosminski in the asylum records: brown hair, slender build, and a specific facial structure. One of the most impressive parts of this investigation was the environmental reconstructive data analysis. Scientists looked at the microscopic pollens and dust particles trapped in the shawl alongside the DNA. They found traces of grain, flour, and specific types of industrial grease. This matched the environment of the Whitechapel docks and the local shops where Kosminski spent his time. It provided a geographic DNA that anchored the suspect to the location in a way that eyewitness testimony never could. It was a multi-layered scientific net that closed around a man who had been gone for a century. Many ask, if we have the DNA, why can't we just be 100% certain? Certainty is always a matter of probability. But when the probability of an error is 1 in millions, it becomes a functional certainty. The identification of Kosminski has allowed the descendants of the victims to finally have a name to link to the tragedy. It brings a form of biological justice to a case that was once the poster child for police failure. The Victorian police did the best they could with the tools of 1888. They even had Kosminski under surveillance. But without the ability to see the microscopic world, they were like people trying to catch a shadow. The Ripper case has always been a mirror for the society of the time. In the 1880s, it reflected the fear of the other. the fear of the immigrant, and the fear of the unknown. It reflected our fascination with the refined villain, the Hannibal Lecter type. But in the 21st century, it reflects our faith in data and molecular truth. We no longer need intuition. We have algorithms. We no longer need rumors. We have sequences. This confirms that we are living in the age of the biological archive. We are realizing that everything we do, every place we go, and every person we interact with leaves a permanent, molecular record of our existence. The impact of this discovery on modern forensics cannot be overstated. It is already being used to reopen thousands of unsolvable cold cases from the 1960s and 70s. If we can find the Ripper from 1888, we can find anyone. But it also serves as a reminder of the fragility of evidence. If that shawl hadn't been kept in a dark, dry drawer by a series of collectors, the DNA would have been destroyed by light and moisture decades ago. We are lucky that the Ripper's silk survived long enough for our technology to catch up to it. But what about the shock mentioned in the title? The real shock wasn't just the name of the man. It was the realization of how close the police were to stopping him. The records show that a witness actually saw a man with a victim and identified Kosminski. But because the witness was also from the same immigrant community, he refused to testify, fearing the repercussions. They had the witness, and they had the location. All they lacked was the science. Knowing that the world's most famous terror could have been stopped on night 2, if they had only had a single DNA sequencer as a haunting thought. It changes the narrative from a brilliant criminal outsmarting everyone to a series of tragic, missed opportunities and a lack of tools. The Ripper will slowly transition from a figure of crime to a figure of pure science. He is now a data point. A very interesting, very dark data point. But a data point nonetheless. The mystery that fueled 1,000 movies is now a solved equation in a lab manual. But the story of how we solved it is just as fascinating. It is a story of human persistence, where scientists refused to believe that time could bury the truth. They used the same techniques we use to track the migration of ancient humans to track a single man through the fog of London. This confirms that we are becoming a species with a perfect memory. Through our technology, we are able to reach back and witness events that were supposed to be forgotten. The identification of Aaron Kosminski is a milestone in our journey toward a more transparent world. But it also leaves us with a sense of the weight of the past. When we look at that shawl now, we don't just see a piece of fabric. We see the final, desperate moments of a life. And we see the biological signature of a man who caused so much pain. Science has given us the who, but it can never truly explain the why. The why remains in the realm of psychology and history. Why did a young man from Poland become the focal point of a global obsession? Why did he go down this path? The DNA tells us he had markers for severe cognitive disarray, which matches his later committance to an asylum. It paints a picture of a man who was lost long before he ever picked up a tool. This doesn't excuse the actions, but it provides a biological context that was missing for over a century. We are no longer looking at a monster in a storybook. We are looking at a deeply broken human being. The global reaction to this confirmation has been a mix of awe and skepticism. Some scientists argue that we need even more samples, perhaps from Kosminski's own remains, to be absolutely sure. But the tomb of Kosminski is lost, and the descendants are hesitant to allow more intrusive testing. For now, the shawl remains the primary witness, and it is a witness that has been cross-examined by the most advanced technology humanity has ever created. The verdict is in. As this chapter of history closes, we have to ask ourselves what other unsolvables are next. Will we find the truth about the princes in the tower? Will we solve the mystery of the Mary Celeste? With the power of AI-assisted genetic reconstruction, the past is becoming an open book. We are no longer at the mercy of what was written down. We can look at the very stuff that people were made of. This is the ultimate nature project, the mapping of our own history, one molecule at a time. The shawl, the hair, the microscopic traces, they all tell a story of a city in chaos and a man who took advantage of that chaos. The identification of Aaron Kosminski isn't just the end of a mystery. It's the beginning of a new way of looking at justice. It's a way of saying that no matter how much time passes, the truth is still there. It's waiting in the dust, in the fibers, and in our own DNA. The world was shocked because the truth was so different from the legends. The truth was smaller, sadder, and much more human. London is still a city of fog and history, But when you walk through Whitechapel today, the shadows feel a little less heavy. The boogeyman has been unmasked. He has a name, a family tree, and a genetic profile. He is no longer a legend. He is a fact. And that is perhaps the most powerful thing science can ever do. Turn our greatest fears into something we can understand, study, and finally, move past. The 137-year wait is over. The case is closed, not by a detective with a magnifying glass, but by a scientist with an algorithm and a single thread of silk. The science of the Jack the Ripper case has shown us that the environment is a witness that never forgets. Everything from the pollens to the isotopes in our bones tells a story. By combining these environmental clues with the genetic roadmap, we can recreate a person's life in startling detail. We can tell what they ate, where they lived, and even the air they breathed. In Kosminski's case, the isotopes in his hair fragments showed a diet consistent with the local poverty of the East End, but with a specific mineral signature that pointed to his upbringing in the Vistula region of Poland. It's a level of detail that would have seemed like sorcery to the people of 1888. This is the future of historical research. We are moving from the macro to the micro. We are realizing that the biggest answers are often found in the smallest places. The grand narrative of history is being replaced by the molecular narrative. And while it might be less romantic than the legends of royal conspiracies, it is far more honest. It tells the story of real people, real suffering, and real evidence. The identification of Aaron Kosminski is a triumph of truth over myth. It is a reminder that we live in a world where the light of science can eventually penetrate even the thickest Victorian fog. So as we look back at those 137 years, we can see them as a bridge from a time when we were helpless against mystery to a time where we are the masters of data. The result shocked everyone because we were so invested in the mystery itself. We wanted the answer to be as grand as the fear. But the answer was just a man. A man who left a trace on a shawl, a trace that waited patiently for a century to be read. The truth was never meant to be hidden forever. It was just waiting for us to be smart enough to see it. And now, finally, we are. Not by a trap of steel, but by a trap of science. The silk shawl, now safe in its climate-controlled storage, remains a symbol of this journey. It is a humble item that carried the heaviest secret in history. Each fiber is a witness to the evolution of technology and the persistence of the human spirit. The identification of Kosminski is a landmark that will be studied for as long as we value the truth. It proves that no secret is safe from the march of time and the power of the human mind. The shadows of Whitechapel have finally been cleared, and in the bright light of the laboratory, the truth stands plain for all to see. The wait is over. Jack has a name, and that name is Aaron Kosminski.